Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels, and I'm so happy you're here. In this video, I'm sharing my thought process behind how I like to create a stamp and smudge background, along with lots of tips and tricks for this technique, using some of the new Everyday 2 stamp sets from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. I'm also sharing the Crusty Grungy effect I used on the gear. As always, you can follow along using your stash of supplies. However, if you are interested in any of the products I'm using in this video, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. Your support when you shop through those links means so much to me. If you're only interested in the process and not what supplies I'm using, skip ahead to around the 4.5-minute mark and you'll be close to where the making begins. For this card, we're going to be working with these new stamp sets from Tim Holtz, including French Garden, Tidbits, Deconstructed, and Hodgepodge. The mediums that I'll be using are Distress Grit Paste, Foundry Wax in the color Mind, be using some Ground Espresso Distress Paint, Ground Espresso Distress Ink, and then some Distress Oxide and Weathered Wood, Peeled Paint, Peacock Feathers, and Uncharted Mariner. I'm also going to be working with some Distress Crayons and Black Soot, Salvaged Patina, and Rusty Hinge. With any of these, you can certainly switch out colors and you know, if you've got some other options instead of the Foundry Wax, anything that you could use that would maybe give you like a metallic finish that you could do with splatters. You could also use like a luster wax to like a rub-on wax for one of the techniques. As far as paint, if you've got other colors of acrylic paint, you could work with any kind of acrylic paint for this. And the texture paste, any kind of texture paste would work. I'm just using the grit paste, and this is the opaque one. It's just the old jar. I'm down to the bottom of it, but trying to use it up before it dries out. To embellish the card, I'm going to be using the metallic sticker book for my sentiment, but you could use a stamp set, other stickers, whatever or a die for your sentiment. That obviously can be switched out. I'm going to be using this detailed butterflies die set from Tim Holtz, but any solid butterfly shape die would work for this. And then I'm also using this Tim Holtz Biggs mechanical die set. I believe these both might be retired, but they still might be available out there if you're looking for them. And if I have them, I'll definitely have them linked in the supply list. The papers I'm going to be working with are the Distress Heavyweight cardstock. So that's the smooth white cardstock from Tim Holtz. Just some black cardstock. And you want some sort of a thin chipboard or even craft stock. Just something, because you're going to layer that with this black cardstock for part of the die cutting, just to add a little more structure and sturdiness to the die cut for the techniques that we're going to be doing on that. Regarding some basic supplies, you're going to want a clean paper towel. So some of the other supplies you're going to need to create this card, just a blending brush, you know, a small one and a regular size one, a paintbrush of some sort with kind of like shorter bristles, palette knife, some rubbing alcohol. This is 91% rubbing alcohol, and then a longer paintbrush that you can use like for splatters. Now to begin, I'm going to start with one of my favorite techniques, and that's the stamp and smudge technique. And I have a piece of Distress Heavy Stock White, which is just the smooth cardstock from Tim Holtz, and I'm using a dotted adhesive, temporary adhesive from scrapbook.com, just to kind of help hold that in the center of my stamping platform, but I also have my magnets as well. I just kind of like the ability to pick this up and kind of move it around if I need to based on my stamping, and then it just kind of helps hold it in place because I can't always guarantee that I'm going to be able to butt it up against the corners here to hold it still. So for this technique, I'm going to be working with these 3 stamp sets and just pulling a variety of the images from these stamp sets to create my background. And when I'm doing the stamp and smudge and I kind of have that collage type background, I usually go through and start kind of just selecting stamps and laying them out on my paper and kind of figuring out like the pattern I want to create. And I just kind of start off with that first and just kind of play around with, you know, where could these stamps go and kind of create my design. And so I just kind of play around with layering them and creating that pattern before I even do anything else. So I'm just kind of going through, picking different ones to create that pattern and just kind of playing around with the placement of them and kind of thinking about, you know, how would this look or how would that one look. And for this one, I have already kind of created this one, so there's not as much planning on my part here, but just kind of getting some of these little stamps out here. And then I also want to include some of these floral stamps, so kind of layer those on. But as you can see, it kind of gives you an idea of what that pattern would look like with all of these kind of like built up on there. And then, you know, if I need any other little images, I can add these in as well. So, and then from there, when I do this technique, I also really like to kind of go ahead and pick out some colors, and typically do 3 to 4 colors. And I find it works really well to pick colors that are complementary to each other, so they're next to each other on the color wheel. So for this particular background, I picked a combination of blues and greens that I thought went well together. And then from there, once I kind of have my pattern picked out, then I kind of start thinking about how I could use these colors and kind of spread those colors across the background so there's not too much of one color anywhere. And as you can see, when I start peeling off, I'm going to kind of take off these smaller stamps, set them to the side. And as you can see here now, I've got the 3 floral images. And so they're kind of spread apart from each other. And then these 3 are spread apart from each other. So in my mind, those would make great ones to all, like these 3 to be the same color and these 3 to be the same color. So I'm going to pick these up and I'm going to stamp these with the green peeled paints. I'm kind of pile them up on there so I remember I'm going to use those with that color. And then these I'm going to use with the weathered wood. And then I can kind of go back from there. This one I'm going to use with the Uncharted Mariner. So then I need to kind of think about, well, what other little, you know, what stamps then could I maybe fill in here and there with that same color, and to kind of create what I like to call like a visual triangle. So like that created a visual triangle, and then the flowers create one, and then we'll do the same thing with this blue, and then we'll add in a little bit more with the peacock then when we stamp in some of these other ones, just to kind of fill in the space, and then of course bring that color around across the design. So So hopefully that's making a little bit of sense. But as we start the stamping, you'll be able to kind of follow me a little bit better. So, but like I said, I kind of like to put the stamps together with the ink pad that I'm going to use, just to kind of help remind me of that. And then, like, as you can see, this isn't going to fit in there in this direction. So I'm going to flip it this way and see if we can fit everything in here. Yeah, there we go. So then you just kind of play around then with the placement here. Push that down in there, and then we can use the magnets, of course, to kind of help hold that in place as well. Scoot that over just a little bit more. So remember, I have that flower image, and I want to leave. I want them. The images can kind of overlap with each other, of course, because that will create some blending. But I don't want this all the way over there. I want to have a little bit of space so that a flower has some room to breathe. There we are. Okay. Oh, got that upside down. There we go. Well, I guess it probably wouldn't matter, but the numbers, you can read them from this direction a little better. All right, so we'll close that. And then from here, I can kind of look and see, like, you know, if these stamps need to be straightened up a little bit, I can give them a little wiggle. And then you could certainly do this with a stamping block. I find it really handy to do this technique with the stamping platform, because you can kind of do so much kind of pre-planning and work out your design. So now we're just going to ink these stamps up real good with the weathered wood. Close that. Put that down. And then here's where you want to have your paper towel handy, the clean one, and you're just going to lightly rub over that and smudge that ink. Now, if your ink pad is super juicy and these images are really, really wet, especially these more solid images, sometimes before I smudge, I'll just kind of dab down and tap off a little bit of that excess ink so it's not quite so much, because sometimes there can be too much ink and it'll just smear the image completely, and then you won't even be able to see what you stamped. So, not usually a problem with ones that are like more detailed like this one, but when you get these more solid ones, that's something that can happen. So just kind of something to think about there. And then I'll set these to the side and clean them off later. Now let's do that peeled paint. And I don't think these are all going to fit on here, so we'll just do 2 at a time here. So kind of fit those flowers in here. And we're going to repeat that same process. Now we're using the peeled paint. Let's apply the ink to those flowers. And then take the paper towel and smear those. And now we're going to do that last flower here. And rub over that one. So as you can see how that ink is starting to kind of smudge and blend with what we're doing here. Now we're just going to start lining up this stamp here with we're going to do with the Uncharted Mariner. So then we're just going to apply that here to this stamp. And now before we go on to adding more with the Uncharted Mariner, I'm actually going to do some of these ones that I want to do with the peacock feathers, just so I can kind of figure out more specifically spreading these across the design here. You can just kind of play with, so you can see that kind of spreads those out. And then I think what then I'll do is for the Uncharted Mariner, I'm going to come back and add this one in a couple spots there. So go ahead and do the peacock feathers next. And stamp that one. And smudge that. And then another thing you can do, like if you feel like, oh, I wanted a little, it didn't really smudge very much because maybe, you know, just wasn't, your pad's not super juicy or you didn't get a lot of ink onto your stamp, you can stamp it again and rub over it and get a, you know, a little more smudge there if you like. So it's really kind of a personal preference on that part of it. So like you see how that's much darker now. Now it's really going to give me some more of that peacock feather up in that section. Okay. And then last, we're going to add in our little, looks kind of like a stamp cancel image. And we're going to go back to that Uncharted Mariner. And I'll add that down here. So as you can see, that just kind of helps. And question what I'm doing there. The way this stamp is cut, there's just a little extra space around it, and the ink's getting off or onto that section, and I don't want that to accidentally get onto my paper, so I'm just wiping that off. But so here you can see, that's kind of a look at the completed stamp and smudge for our card background. And as you can kind of see, like those, how your eye kind of moves around and across that because of how we've spread those colors out. So just one of those things, and I'll be super honest, I often just practice stamp this a couple times till I get a layout that I'm happy with and where the colors are positioned. And when I do that, I just work on some scrap printer paper and you know, just practice a couple times if you need to. So the next part of the background is, I'm just going to take some ground espresso distress ink. You could also use oxide ink, and I'm going to just ink the edges here with that. And I like to kind of put the ink onto my brush and then kind of rub it around on the craft mat a little bit, and then working that into a circular motion, and then just kind of pull that ink onto the corners and around the edges there until I'm happy with how much I have on there. And one more step for the background here. I'm going to add some splatters with that Mind foundry wax, and to do that you're also going to need some isopropyl alcohol, 91%, and with these you want to make sure you shake that. If you've not used these before, if you're not familiar with them, you need to make sure you shake it up until that ball rattles. And I'm just going to add a little drop to our craft mat and add a little isopropyl alcohol. Doesn't take much, just a few little drops there. And mix that up with your brush. And then I'm working here in a splat box, and I'm just going to splatter this across my background. And this foundry wax is a little different than typical wax that you might work with. It's like in a jar and you kind of rub on with your finger. As you notice, this is a liquid that comes out, and it doesn't look like anything at all at this point. This wax has to be heat set to become permanent. At this point, you could pretty much wipe this off. It might leave a little bit of a stain, but you're not going to have any kind of a shine that you'll get once you apply the heat to it. So to do that, you're going to want to use a heat tool of some sort. I recommend using like a heat embossing gun, something that's a little more power. You could also use a regular heat tool, but it just take a longer time. And once you apply the heat, you'll see this where the wax splattered on there, you'll see that it turns shiny and then it's permanent. But it's only permanent with heat application. So like what's here on my craft mat, once this dries, this is going to turn, as I keep working with it and it dries up, it turns into a powder and just disappears into nothing. And it's not even there anymore. Like you can, like a little bit, it's on my finger, but that'll just wash right off. So, and then as far as like your brush, you can clean that with just a little water. You could put a little rubbing alcohol on there and some water too to clean it off. But yeah, it cleans up really easy. Now you can see that it's shiny where those little splatters are. So yeah, it's kind of a cool way to add a little bit of interest to the background. And then the last thing I'll do for this background is to add some machine stitching with black thread around the outside edge, and then the background is finished. So now we're going to move on to the embellishment pieces, and for that I've die cut the butterfly just from some white heavy stock, using one of the butterflies from the Detailed Butterflies die set, and then I've cut a piece of black cardstock and a piece of thin chipboard using the Mechanicals Bigs die set. So now we're going to add some stamping detail to the butterfly, and to do that we're going to use the Hodgepodge stamp set. So I'm just going to position that here into my stamping platform. As you can see, this is a pretty large stamp and pretty much fills up the stamping platform. And then with the die cut, I'm going to put a little bit of that temporary adhesive on the back here, just to help hold it in place. And then I'm going to just kind of play around with like where I might want this image, like what on the background might I want on my butterfly. So kind of play around with that. And then we're going to stamp this using the Uncharted Mariner Distress Oxide ink. So I'm just going to get that ink here onto the stamp. And you're going to want your paper towel again because we're going to do that stamp and smudge technique again. So we'll press that down. Oh, didn't get enough ink on there for the whole design, so I'll just do that over again here. There we go. And now we'll just take that paper towel, clean part of it, and just smudge over. And so there's a look at that. So this die has, it almost kind of embosses when it cuts. And so I think it's kind of cool how when you do the smudging, it will kind of highlight some of that embossed design as well. So there is our butterfly. And now I'm just going to ink the edges of it with a little bit of ground espresso. And for this, I'm just using the little smaller blending brush. Just a little bit easier to get into the corners. And there you go. And then to finish that off, I'm going to just add a little bit of black machine stitching down the center of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is glue this black gear die cut to the chipboard, or you could also use craft stock or another layer or two of just black cardstock if you like. Just something to make it a little bit more sturdy. And then get that lined up there. It's a nice thing about liquid glue. Sometimes you got a second to move things around. Now we're going to take our Distress Grit Paste, opaque. You could also use the translucent if you like. And I'm going to get in here and get a little bit onto my spatula. And then I'm going to kind of start tapping it along in here. I also sometimes find, I mean, you can use a spatula. I also sometimes find that just using my finger is even better. I don't know, I feel like I have a little more control. over where it's going. And you don't have to put it everywhere, but kind of here and there, just to add some texture. I'm not trying to make it super thick because I don't want it to take too long to dry. But you can put a little layer on and then come back and add a little more here and there, just so like that some of it's a little thicker in places than others, just to add some variation. So, that looks pretty good. Get some of that off my finger. And I just have some press and seal here in the jar just to try to kind of keep some of the air out so it doesn't dry out on me. But this jar is almost empty, so that can give me a new one. And then we'll clean all this off. And then we're going to just set this to the side and let it dry. This grit paste dries pretty quickly. You can also speed it up just a little bit with a heat tool if you want to. If you're really, really impatient, you just want to make sure you keep that heat tool moving over it so that you don't burn it or melt it or anything. And then while that's drying, I'm going to go take a little coffee break. So now that the grit paste is dried, I'm going to add some ground espresso distress paint. Give that a little mix. And just a little drop of it to my craft mat there. And then I'm using just a dry brush. This isn't wet. And then I'm tapping off quite a bit of the paint because I don't want to completely paint it super dark. And I'm just gonna add that brown paint here and there all across the grit paste area, because as you can see, that grit paste is white. This is where, like, if you wanted to use the translucent, you could do that. But I also like the combination of the black cardstock with the brown paint to just add to kind of the rusty effect that we're creating here. So if you need a little more paint, of course, just add that on there. Okay. And once we get that on there, then we're going to let that dry. Now that this paint is dry, now we're going to add some of the Distress crayons. And I'm going to start off with the black soot first, and then just going to kind of rub that here and there over the surface. If you want, you can use your finger to kind of help spread some of that around a little bit if you like. And there's really not a rhyme or reason to how to add it or where to add it. I'm just kind of adding it here and there. And if you rub over and some of that grit paste comes off, don't worry about it. You can go back and fix that later. And kind of get that added on. Now we're going to do the same thing with the rusty hinge. And then now we're going to go in with the salvaged patina. And for this one, you do want to kind of do like just a light hand of just kind of tapping it on here and there. Kind of rub it, tap it. But you're not trying to turn everything salvage patina blue. So. But it's one of those things where you can always go back over and add more color to it here and there if you feel like you need more. anything anywhere. So that's kind of where we are at this level. And you could also go back in, like if you've got some areas where maybe you've got still has some of the paste showing, you could go back in with your paint and just touch those up a little bit if you like. So we can do that. Just grab a little bit out of the tip of the brush and tap that on there. You've got a few spots. And then you can just kind of go back and forth between this and that till you're pleased with how it's looking. If you feel like you're kind of covering up some of what you just put on there, let that paint dry, and then go back and add some more of the crayon. You can also use your heat tool to kind of help speed that up just a little bit. Just make sure you keep it moving so that it's not overheating in any one area. And then the final step on this is I'm going to add a little bit of the foundry wax that we used earlier on the splatters. So I'm just going to shake that up again. And then you're just going to put a little drop of that onto your craft mat. And then again, just going to kind of stipple it here and there. You can also use your finger. For this part, you could also use like a luster wax or any kind of other rubbing type wax if you want to do it that way. And I'm just kind of tapping that on here and there. And now I'm gonna take my heat tool and heat set that, and then we'll kind of see where we are, if we need to add any more or not. I think I'm gonna add a little bit more along this edge here. I feel like I got any over there. And then again, like if you wanted to go back in with the crayons a little bit and, you know, darken up some of those areas, you could. Again, like there is like really no exact perfect science to doing this kind of a rusty crusty technique. It's really just adding layers until you're happy with how it looks. Kind of smear that in a little bit if you want, if it's too shiny for you. Go back in and add a little bit more. That salvage patina just really kind of makes things pop a little bit when you get just a teeny touch of that on there. So there we go, rusty, crusty, grungy gear. Here's a look at the completed card. I finished off the background with some black machine stitching and then adhered it to a piece of black cardstock. To further embellish the card, I added a wad of black sewing thread behind the butterfly and then adhered it with some foam adhesive to add a little dimension. The final touch was a sticker sentiment. I lightly rubbed a sanding tool over the edges to distress it and then adhered it to a piece of foam tape for more dimension. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.